In September of AD 476, Romulus Augustus was deposed as emperor. Rome had fallen, an era had ended, the empire was lost. Less than a century later, a young king ascended to the throne in Constantinople, and after a tumultuous start, began his quest to reunify and reestablish the Roman Empire. This is the imperial restoration of Rome under Justinian. In AD 285, Emperor Diocletian decided that the empire had grown too vast to be administered from a single seat of government. Thus, the empire was split between East and West. Later, in AD 330, Constantine would spend a great deal of effort increasing the prestige of the eastern half, even renaming the capital in his own honor. While the Western Empire crumbled and Rome eventually fell, the eastern half, also called the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly a millennium. Born in the Balkans to a peasant family, Justinian ascended to the throne of the Byzantine Empire in 527. His reign was nearly cut short as riots erupted in Constantinople over a chariot race, resulting in an armed revolt against the government. Justinian, about to abandon the city, was encouraged by his wife, Empress Theodora, to remain and uphold his empire. Justinian sought to heal the wounds which had developed not only in the Roman Empire itself, but also in the Catholic Church, which had become its unifying feature. To Justinian, church and state were codependent, inseparable, and complementary pieces, both ordained by God to uphold one another. There are two great gifts which God, in his love for man, has granted from on high: the priesthood and the imperial dignity, he wrote. The first serves divine things, while the latter directs and administers human affairs. Both, however, proceed from the same origin and adorn the life of mankind. His greatest general, Belisarius, was given the task of reclaiming the lands previously held by Rome. While he did not reconquer the empire in its entirety, much of North Africa and Italy, including of course the city of Rome itself, were reunified as part of Justinian's revived Roman Empire. The general date for the empire's restoration is often cited as August AD 554, the date of the Pragmatic Sanction of Justinian I, which formally asserted Roman law throughout Italy following the Gothic War. Reunifying the religion would prove a more difficult task as doctrinal issues threatened to tear apart the Catholic Church. Justinian felt responsibility to intervene as Justinian, like succeeding Byzantine emperors, regarded himself as the vice-regent of Christ. It was Justinian who would cement the Bishop of Rome's preeminence in the Church, even appointing 3 successive popes. Justinian's efforts would be recorded in history as the imperial restoration. However, Justinian would learn that just as Rome was not built in a day, reunifying the empire is not a simple or inexpensive task. His dream of restoring Rome's former glory left his troops overextended and his treasury empty. Soon after his death, the empire began losing territory. Over the course of his reign, Justinian had more than doubled his territory. Less than a century later, all that he had gained and more would be lost. Justinian's legacy can still be felt to this day. His words describing his motivation to restore the grandeur of Rome could be attributed to many subsequent conquerors who chased the dream of a revived Roman Empire. Much has been disputed about the ghost of the Roman Empire that still lurks far beyond the shores of the Mediterranean. The heritage of Roman law is not a ghost but a living reality. It is present in the court as well as in the marketplace. It lives on not only in the institutions but even in the language of all civilized nations. The dream of reviving the glory of the empire has been a guiding force in Europe ever since.
Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, is one of the key historical figures in the reconstruction and unification of the Western Roman Empire. He arrived on the scene almost 300 years after the last Roman emperor to control Western Europe was deposed by Germanic tribes. Who was Charlemagne, and what role did he have in the restoration of Rome? Since the fall of the Western Roman Empire in AD 476, the role of the Bishop of Rome was severed from the remaining regions controlled by Constantinople in the Eastern Roman Empire. This was briefly reversed under the rule of Justinian, as examined in part 1 of this series. However, 3 years after Justinian's death, the Lombard invasion of Italy took place. Charlemagne was a Germanic warrior. In fact, the entire Frankish kingdom consisted primarily of modern-day France and Germany, ruled by a Germanic elite. His father, Pepin the Short, was the first member of the Carolingian dynasty, with the blessing of the Pope, to be crowned King of the Franks in AD 751. In exchange of this support, he donated the land that became the Papal States, and it was Pepin's close relationship with the papacy which formed the future role of Charlemagne and the Church in Rome. When Charlemagne was crowned king in AD 768, it was alongside his brother Carloman. 4 years later, Carloman died and the entire Frankish kingdom was under his control. His early reign was replete with military campaigns in order to expand and solidify his rule. With the souring of the Lombard papacy relationship, largely due to outstanding debts which Rome was unable to repay, and claims of land in the peninsula, Charlemagne, as had his father, chose to side with the Pope. It was in 773 that he crossed the Alps for his first campaign in northern Italy. With the Pope granting Charlemagne the title of Patrician sometime during his successful campaign against the Lombards, the already growing divide between the Eastern Roman Empire and the Bishop of Rome was well underway, with the latter drawing much stronger ties with the future leader of Western Europe. Charlemagne was an ardent supporter of the Catholic Church and saw his role and responsibilities as king as a way to proselytize both his subjects in Francia and the surrounding pagan tribes. His rule ushered in a period of enlightenment. Although his educational upbringing was considered basic, Charlemagne brought about the Carolingian Renaissance, which saw the standardization of text, significantly increased literacy levels, and served to provide increased trade, economic stability, and a rebirth of culture which hadn't been seen since the Roman Empire. His reign stands in stark contrast to other rulers of his time, in the period often referred to as the Dark Ages. Charlemagne was actively involved in all aspects of governing the kingdom. However, it was his direction in religious affairs and close relations with the papacy that paved the way for his future title of Holy Roman Emperor. After a number of years of successful campaigns, particularly in the north and east of his territory, Charlemagne traveled to Rome in the winter of 800. It was on Christmas Day that he knelt to pray in St. Peter's Basilica when Pope Leo III crowned him Imperator Romanorum, or Emperor of the Romans. This was despite the Eastern Roman Empire being ruled by Empress Irene, who was standing in as regent for her son Constantine VI. The act of crowning Charlemagne was not intended to divide the West from the East, but an effort, at least on the part of the Pope, to unite both sides under the rule of Charlemagne. In the end, the reign of Charlemagne was transformed by this event. He sat in court on a throne made of marble, erected prior to the coronation but intentionally placed on a higher level of the chamber so that all his subjects would look up to him and regard him as king, ordained with a divine right to rule. Charlemagne even sat in judgment over the Pope on one occasion. His role combined that of church and state, and working alongside the pontiff, Catholicism spread both through the schools he constructed and the laws he enforced. In more recent times, Pope John Paul II called Charlemagne the Father of Europe. And in many respects, Charlemagne ignited the dream of a united Europe, a dream that still exists in many today.
The early 900s had seen the decline of Charlemagne's once mighty empire, and a period of utter corruption for the Catholic Church. The heart of Europe was again split into an array of quarreling factions waiting to be united. In part 2 of our Viewpoint series on the Restoration of Rome, it was discussed how in AD 800, the Frankish ruler Charlemagne, allied with the Roman Church, established an empire, uniting most of Central and Western Europe and Italy, and, as historians affirm, restored the Roman imperial system, being crowned by the Pope in AD 800 a new Roman emperor. After the death of Charlemagne in 814, division and weak leadership began a rapid decay of the restored tradition of the Roman Caesars. In the early 900s, in the territory northeast of the Rhine, one Henry the Saxon is elected king, and he founds a continental Saxon dynasty. In AD 936, his son Otto is elected king by the local nobility and crowned king by the bishops of Mainz and Cologne. Otto had married in 930 Edith, the daughter of the English-Saxon king Edward the Elder, demonstrating the close relation between the English and German Saxons at the time. Otto, a descendant of Charlemagne, is the first since his illustrious ancestor to assert his authority with effect. He suppressed the rebellious barons and brings centralized control to the Saxon and many of the German states. In 951, he achieves a victory in northern Italy, adding Lombardy to his kingdom. Between the death of Charlemagne and the crowning of Otto, Europe was plagued with internal strife as well as regular invasions of pagan forces from the east, especially the devastating and regular invasions of the Magyars. Otto alone, on the continent of Europe, took a strong stand against the invaders. In AD 955, Otto delivered a crushing blow against the invaders at the Battle of Lechfeld, or Augsburg. From henceforth, he was known as the protector of Europe. During the period since the death of Charlemagne, the papacy had fallen into one of the most corrupt periods in its history. Much of its authority was diminished as a result. After the Battle of Lechfeld, a new pope, John XII, appealed to Otto for help. He made a desperate plea for assistance against numerous enemies who sought his destruction. Seizing this opportunity, Otto invades Italy and in 961 inflicts absolute defeat on the adversaries of John. This results in a remarkable coronation that takes place on February 2nd, 962, seeing Otto crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor, the successor to Charlemagne, Justinian, and the Caesars. The empire is thus restored once again to the mutual benefit of both the secular and religious arms. There is a difference in the days of Otto I, however. The papacy was weak and corrupt, but still influenced the general population, and thus was useful to Otto. However, Otto did not wish to have a competitor in Rome. Hence, only 11 days after his coronation, John XII signs a treaty that Otto has drafted. It was designed to regulate relations between the emperor and the papacy, but placed the emperor in a superior position in terms of secular government, and also suggested that he had the power to confirm a pope in office. The pope signed the document, but realizing it ceded many of his powers to Otto, rebelled by siding with Berengar II, the former king of Italy, whom Otto had deposed. Otto then deposed John XII and set up Leo VIII as pope in an open demonstration of the totality of his authority. Although the full title, Sacrum Imperium Romanum Nationis Germanicae, Holy Roman Emperor of the German nation, was not formally applied until the 15th century, nonetheless, it is not without reason that Otto I is also known as Otto the Great. By his will, diplomatic skills, and courage, he welded together many of the German-speaking states and breathed new life into what is known as the First German Reich, or kingdom. But he also did so in a manner that strengthened the Roman Church, believing it would be a useful and stabilizing influence, not unlike the tradition set by Constantine 6 centuries before, resurrecting once more the Roman system.
At a time when bloodlines determined kings and kingdoms could be acquired through marriage, it was predictable that someone would find a way to hack the system. Through generations of inbreeding and politically motivated marriages, the House of Habsburg cobbled together one of the largest, yet least unified empires the world has ever known. The power held by the Habsburgs would peak in the 1520s and 1530s under Charles V. It's helpful to begin several generations earlier in 1356, when Charles IV issued a decree known as the Golden Bull of 1356, distancing Germany, more formally known as the Holy Roman Empire, from the influence of the papacy. The relationship between the European ruler and the papacy had been essential to previous empires led by Charlemagne and Otto, as explained in parts 2 and 3 of our Restoration of Rome series. This bull established how German kings would be chosen for the next 450 years. The king of the Romans was thereafter to be elected by the majority vote of 7 electoral princes. By omitting any mention of the papacy, the document virtually nullified papal claims to intervene or confirm an election. More than 150 years later, in 1520, Charles V is crowned king in Aachen, Germany. Charles had begun his political career 5 years prior, assuming rule over the Netherlands as the Duke of Burgundy. A year later, following the death of his maternal grandfather, Ferdinand II, Charles was proclaimed King of Aragon and Castile, eventually controlling all of Spain and its territories in the New World. After the death of his paternal grandfather, Emperor Maximilian I, Charles was elected King of Germany. He now controlled an immense portion of Europe and beyond. However, there was little to unify this emerging empire. What common purpose could be held by conquistadors in the New World, princes in Germany, and noblemen in Spain or the Netherlands? At this time, Charles assumes the title of Roman Emperor, but was not yet crowned as such by the papacy. The rift established by the Golden Bull still existed. Charles recognized that religion stood as his best opportunity to create a cohesive empire. A fervent Roman Catholic, Charles hoped to unite all Europe in a Christian empire. However, a continent-wide crisis was fermenting which would cause both church and state to renew their historic interdependence. Only a month after Charles V moved to Spain, Martin Luther nails a document to the door at the church at Wittenberg, Germany. Europe was thrown into crisis. Fast forward just 3 years and Luther is excommunicated. Having added ruler of the German states to his impressive resume, Charles seeks to end the crisis by calling Luther to the Diet, or Assembly of Worms. Charles promises Luther safe passage and an opportunity to defend his ideas. It was his hope that Luther would back down. After Luther refused to recant the substance of his writings and left the Diet, Charles drew up the Edict of Worms. With it, he rejected Luther's doctrines and essentially declared war on Protestantism. His efforts to fight Protestantism were not enough to keep Pope Clement on his side. More concerned with maintaining his own fragile rule over parts of Italy, Clement shifted his support between Charles and his primary rival, King Francis I of France, eventually siding with the French king in an attempt to slow the spread of the Habsburg rule. Uniting his empire under the banner of Christianity would prove difficult with the head of the Catholic Church supporting his enemy. In 1527, Spanish and German troops sacked Rome. The Pope, having surrendered to the mutinous troops, was ready for compromise. Having made peace with Charles, met him in Bologna. There he crowned him emperor in February 1530. It was to be the last time that a Holy Roman Emperor was crowned by a Pope. Charles was a guiding influence on the Counter-Reformation, which sought to rectify some of the issues in the Catholic Church which had led to the Reformation. While this would greatly alter the Church, his dream of reunification would not be achieved. Overextended, in debt, and facing external threats from both European rivals such as France and the rise of the Ottoman Turks under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Habsburg Empire had reached its zenith and began to wane. Charles would abdicate the throne, dividing his empire between his son and brother. Charles was not the first, nor would he be the last to attempt binding ill-fitting divisions of Europe into a type of revived Roman Empire. While religion had previously been seen as the ideal unifying agency, it too had become a divisive one. Any future government attempts to unite the continent will have to find a way to overcome the divisive force of religion.
By the late 1700s, Habsburg power had declined severely from its high point in the heady days of Charles V in the early 1500s. The situation led Voltaire to remark, "This body which was called and which still calls itself the Holy Roman Empire was in no way holy, nor Roman, nor an empire." However, the dream of a unified Europe would not be lost. a Corsican officer would burst on the scene, culminating in one of the most fascinating coronations in history. The Habsburg Empire had declined under the pressure of European wars and the resulting social and economic instability. The old order was changing. Great Britain was becoming the world's dominant power, eclipsing its continental counterparts. In France, the excesses of the monarchy, as well as the financial support to the rebellion of the American colonies, left much of the French population in a state of economic depravity, creating an environment ripe for confrontation. Inspired by a combination of the values of the evolving British political system, the social revolution in America, and the influence of the social philosophies of Diderot, Rousseau, and Voltaire, which encouraged a more egalitarian social order, undercutting the sharp class distinctions, the French Revolution began. The actual revolution commenced as a movement as early as 1787, exploding in full force in 1789, spurred on by a major crop failure the previous year. Orderly governance of the nation fell apart as many factions, bourgeois, peasants, and royalists, engaged one another. It was a terrible time, which is described by the term Reign of Terror from 1793 to 1794. Rulers of surrounding nations feared revolts in their own lands, and foreign wars added to the stress of France. A royalist effort to regain control of the nation was defeated in 1795 by a force led by a young Corsican officer who had already, at age 26, risen to be the youngest general in the French army. Napoleon Bonaparte had been born on the island of Corsica in 1769, only 1 year after the island had been sold by the Republic of Genoa to the Kingdom of France. Napoleon's father was a lawyer of noble birth, and also served as the representative of Corsica to the court of Louis XVI. At a relatively young age, Napoleon attended a famed military academy, excelling in mathematics and history. In 1785, when only 16 years of age, he was commissioned as a lieutenant in the French artillery regiment. During the period after the French Revolution broke out, Napoleon fought in a number of engagements as foreign armies threatened France. He distinguished himself in strategic prowess, and in his 20s rose to the rank of general. In 1798, he led an expedition to Egypt, where on land he was successful. But British Admiral Nelson's brilliant victory over the French Navy in the Nile caused Napoleon to return to France. Part of the reason for his return is an invitation from one of the revolutionary leaders, who needed a sound person to participate in a coup to overthrow the existing government. Napoleon was a willing participant, and the government was now in the hands of 3 consuls, with Napoleon being the first consul. After 10 years of chaos, France was ready to have the stability offered by a dictator. Napoleon immediately began a series of reforms to put France on a much more stable footing. Censorship of the press was introduced to control rumors. Improvements were made to secondary and university education, now to be controlled by the state and not the church. Judges were appointed and given tenure. A more impartial law code was introduced, Napoleonic Code, which is still the legal basis for much of the European continent. Support was made available for business development and for agricultural improvement. In the course of the Revolution, the Republic launched an attack on Catholicism in France. Napoleon, although not personally religious, sensed the unpopularity of the anti-Catholic stance, so for political reasons he mended fences with the Vatican. An agreement was negotiated with Rome in 1801 called the Concordat. The Pope, who was now in a position of weakness, accepted French authority in the appointment of bishops and relinquished ownership of state-confiscated lands. France, in turn, agreed to pay the salaries of the clergy and recognize Catholicism as a state religion. Thus, the Church and Napoleon acknowledged their mutual dependence. In 1804, due to a series of royalist plots, advisors suggested that Napoleon become Emperor of France. The idea was put to the people in a referendum, no secret ballots, and over 99% of the vote was favorable. Preparations were made for a great coronation in Notre Dame Cathedral. Pope Pius VII was invited to Paris to officiate in a ceremony that had all the trappings of imperial Rome. Napoleon permitted the Pope to anoint him, but placed a crown on his own head to symbolize his authority over the Church. The imagery of the event harkened back to the Caesars, of whom Napoleon considered himself an heir. "I am a true Roman emperor. I am the best of the Caesars." He also believed himself to be a successor, not of the kings of France, but of Charlemagne, even though Francis II had renounced the title of Holy Roman Emperor and dissolved the empire in 1806 after his defeat at the Battle of Austerlitz. That year Napoleon crowned himself with the Iron Crown of the Lombards, the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. He stated, "Tell them that I am Charlemagne, the sword of the Church, their emperor." Alas, this new Caesar would have a short-lived empire. Despite the great reforms he initiated domestically, foreign wars eroded France's strength, wealth, and will. Britain starved France with the Continental Blockade, and German, Russian, and other forces began to defeat Napoleon's once victorious armies. Finally, in 1815, the last battle against the British and the Prussians at Waterloo ended the dream of a new Roman Empire. Napoleon died 6 years later, a prisoner of the British of gastric cancer while on the island of St. Helena. The fifth restoration of the Roman system of church and state was at an end. Since the fall of the Roman Empire, repeated attempts have been made to achieve the elusive goal of European unity. Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto I, Charles V, and Napoleon all sought a confederation of Europe largely through the mechanism of the Holy Roman Empire. During the 20th century, the Axis powers attempted to dominate Europe with their own take on a restoration of the Roman Empire. 19th century Europe was a fragmented continent, divided between small principalities and states which saw many revolutionary movements and changes. By 1871, Italy was united by Giuseppe Garibaldi, and in the north of Europe, the Prussian Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck forged the fragmented Germanic states into a new country called Germany under Prussian leadership. Bismarck started and won 2 wars which made his German state the dominant power in the continent. Austria was defeated in 1866 in a quick 7-week campaign, and later France was defeated in 1871 after a 6-month conflict. To further humiliate France, Bismarck arranged to have the Prussian king Wilhelm I crown German emperor or Kaiser, Caesar, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, south of Paris, declaring the establishment of the Second Reich of the German people. Shortly after the death of Wilhelm I, Wilhelm II became the new Kaiser in 1888. One of his first acts was to dismiss the architect of the new German state, Bismarck. Without Bismarck's guiding hand, Germany was soon plunged into World War I. By 1918, the new German Empire was in ruins, defeated, and impoverished. The Second Reich is dead. Subsequently, largely under pressure from France, the Treaty of Versailles imposes crushing and humiliating terms on Germany, making economic recovery from the war very difficult. Through the 1920s, Germany, under the Weimar Republic, experienced a period of great social liberalism, as did Italy. At this time, there was a growing presence of leftist philosophy and extreme socialism, somewhat due to the communist regime which had taken over Russia. This resulted in the development of a marked social tension between the socialist left and the conservative right. Matters rose to a head as a consequence of the Great Economic Depression of the 1930s. In Italy, a young journalist, Benito Mussolini, began a movement to counter communist influences. In 1921, he founded the Fascist Party. In addition to the black shirts that identified the party's supporters, they adopted as their symbol the emblem of authority of imperial Rome, the fasces. Mussolini had grown up imagining himself a successor to the Caesars. On October 22, 1922, King Victor Emmanuel III calls upon Mussolini to form a government. To quell the riots that are overtaking much of Italy, Mussolini is granted emergency powers and is soon declared the dictator of Italy. In 1929, the Italian government signed a series of agreements known as the Lateran Treaty, whereby Italy recognized papal sovereignty over Vatican City, and the Roman Catholic Church became the official state religion. In Germany, the Parliament of the Weimar Republic is hamstrung by the many competing parties. The Depression has hit Germany very hard. Financial deprivation and runaway inflation combined with a fear of the far left spawned anger and a call for order in society. Out of nowhere, a formerly obscure Austrian artist and war veteran, leading a party filled with anger toward those it blamed for Germany's problems, rises to power. In 1933, Adolf Hitler is asked to form a government. Once in power, all opposition is brutally swept aside. The Third Reich of the German people has arrived. In 1936, the Rome-Berlin axis is formed. Hitler and Mussolini agree to coordinate their foreign policy. As it was since the days of Charlemagne and Otto the Great, the German-speaking peoples and those of Italy tie their destinies together. Although the Nazis and the fascists were far from being religious, efforts were made to reach agreements with the Roman Catholic Church, which still held some sway with European populations. The Church was then limited by the two dictators. While it is very difficult even to compare the Roman Empire with its power and stability and longevity to the rather inept and unstable Mussolini, this new alliance did not shy away from its references to Rome and its symbolism. In addition to the fasces, Mussolini in 1932 ordered that the handshake be replaced with the Roman salute. Many supporters began to call him Divine Caesar. In Germany as well, allusions to the Holy Roman Empire were frequent as Hitler spoke about the need to unite all Europeans under one tent. By claiming for his government the mantle of the Third Reich, Hitler attempted to position himself within the larger context of German and European history. In his mind, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich would serve as a natural conclusion of a process that he traced back to the coronation of Charlemagne in 800. In Hitler's own mind, he was connected with Charlemagne and the dream of a unified Europe under German domination. This is reflected in a comment he made to Albert Speer in reference to the location of his mountain residence at Oberschlausberg, that overlooked Mount Untersberg, which according to the legends is the place where Charlemagne sleeps, waiting to rise again with his knights and restore a glorious new Reich. You see the Untersberg over there? It is no accident I have my residence opposite it. Clearly, in the minds of Hitler and Mussolini, there was the greater goal of establishing a unified Europe as a restoration of the glory of a unified Roman Empire. Their efforts, of course, resulted in the horror of World War II. The Rome-Berlin axis collapsed in rubble in the very war they started, leaving tens of millions dead and many more homeless and destitute, and a continent in ruin. The sixth attempt to restore the Empire of Rome and the 1,000-year Reich had ended.
Subscribe and click the notification bell to receive updates about new content. Visit tomorrowsworld.org for more articles, telecasts, and booklets.